Good afternoon and welcome to the Small Grains Annual Summary and Grain Stocks Briefing. My name is Lance Hodig and I serve as chair of the Agricultural Statistics Board at NASS. This briefing is for the Secretary of Agriculture and other policymakers at USDA. Better understand the content and context of today's reports. We're very pleased to have Robert Bonney, USDA's Undersecretary for Farm Production and Conservation, join as the Secretary designate today. I'd like to share that we do have several visitors with us today. We have some members of the Interagency Council on Statistical Policy, or ICSP, mentoring program. So welcome to all of you today. And then also I'd like to express our appreciation to the NASS field office staff who came in to assist us with today's reports. That included Greg Colson, Tanner Gray, and Julie Mining. Before I turn things over to our presenter, I do have a few notes for our live streaming audience. These reports are considered principal federal economic indicator reports, and the Office of Management and Budget provides specific guidance on how these important reports are to be released. OMB statistical policy instructs policymaking officials to refrain from making public comment regarding the content of these reports within 30 minutes of their release. Therefore, we will not be taking questions from the public during this briefing. NASS staff are available for phone or email questions, and NASS will host a social media event at 1 o'clock Eastern Time this afternoon. We strive to have everything presented at this briefing match the official record. However, should there be any discrepancy, always refer the official published estimates. With that, I'll turn things over to Patrick Boyle. He is the chief of the NASS Crops Branch. Patrick.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, and welcome to those who are joining us on the live stream as well. We've got quite a bit to cover, so we'll go ahead and get started. As we normally do, anytime we want to highlight changes or key details about a report, we include a special note on the cover of today's Grain Stocks publication. Nothing really new here, but more of a reminder to our data users that September marks the end of the marketing year for corn and soybeans. Because we now have a pretty clear picture of stocks and usage data, as well as final administrative data from FSA and RMA, we have an opportunity to review and, if needed, revise 2023 acreage and production estimates. As you can see in the note, we made a couple of very minor revisions to each of those crops, and I'll talk a little bit more about those adjustments later in the presentation. Before we dig into the report, I want to share some information on the data sources that were used. First, our operator survey, the September Ag Survey. It included just under 56,000 samples, and we asked producers about final acreage and yield numbers on their farm. If there were any crops still unharvested, we asked several questions about those acres as well. The survey also included questions about grain stocks and storage capacity on their operations. For the off-farm stocks, we surveyed right around 8,000 elevators and commercial storage facilities and captured stocks and capacity information. Additionally, as part of our objective yield program, our trained enumerators collected samples from more than 1,100 winter wheat fields across the major growing areas just prior to harvest. In some cases, they also returned after harvest to measure any harvest loss. We also took into account several non-survey data sources. These include the latest certified acreage information from Farm Service Agency, as well as any acres reported failed to FSA or RMA. One quick slide on our September Ag Survey, that producer survey. On this map, you'll see how those 56,000 samples were distributed by state. As you'd expect, states with significant small grains production, as well as on-farm storage capacity, were sampled more heavily. We'll start off with acreage, yield, and production numbers for the small grains crops. First up is winter wheat. The final planted acres for winter wheat is estimated at 33.4 million acres, down 0.3% or 415,000 acres from the August forecast. It's down 9% or just over 3.3 million acres from 2023. Harvested acreage at 26.1 million is up 2% from the previous estimate and 6.3% from last year. The final yield of 51.7 bushels per acre is down 1.5 bushels or 2.8% from last month. It's up 1.1 bushels or 2.2% from last season. All of those numbers result in a total production of 1.35 billion bushels, down 0.9% from August, but up 8.6% when compared to 2023. This chart shows winter wheat planted and harvested acreage over the last 10 years. The top line represents planted acres, while the bottom line indicates harvested acres. While planted acreage is down from last year, you'll note that that harvested acreage at 26.1 million acres is up from last year. That is actually the highest level we've seen since 2016. We had historically high abandonment in 2023, and we're now returning to more normal levels this year. Switching over to yields, this chart shows how the final yield in today's report ranks historically. The green line shows final yields for each of the past 30 years. The gray line represents a trend line, which is a moving historical average. As you can see, this season's estimate of 51.7 bushels per acre is slightly over the gray trend line. And here's a breakdown of yields by state. A little orientation on what all the numbers and colors mean on this map. The top number is the final yield from today's report measured in bushels per acre. The bottom number is the percent change from the August forecast. If you see a pound sign next to the top number, that represents a record high. And we did have a few record high yields this year in South Dakota, Missouri, and Wisconsin. States shaded in blue are showing an increase from the previous forecast, while states shaded in red are showing a decrease. The deeper the color, the greater the change. States in gray are unchanged from the previous forecast. There are also a few states in white. Those are states in which we do not do a monthly forecast for winter wheat during the season, just a final estimate now in September, so there's no comparison to the previous month for those states. Next up, a similar map. This one just shows the year-over-year comparison, the comparison to last year by state. One more slide on yield before we shift to production. I'd mentioned earlier the objective yield survey. This chart includes one important measurement we took each month throughout the growing season and again just prior to harvest. It's an estimate of the number of heads per square foot from sampled winter wheat fields in the major growing areas. The blue vertical bars indicate the number of heads per square foot, while the red dot shows the corresponding yield estimate for the 10 states in the objective yield program. You'll see that head counts are up from 2023, and our final count this month held relatively steady when compared to August. Next, a quick look at the total production and how it compares to recent years. As I mentioned earlier, winter wheat production is estimated at 1.35 billion bushels, and this marks the highest production level since 2016. Finally, our last slide for winter wheat. A look at how that production number compared to a sample of industry expectations. The way this chart is laid out, each of those blue dots represents an individual industry member's published pre-report forecast of total winter wheat production. The red squares are NASA's forecasts each month and today's final estimate. As you can see, for September, our final number is pretty much in line with the pre-report expectations. Switching over to spring wheat, planted acreage at 10.6 million acres is down 0.7% from last month and 5.1% or 575,000 acres from last year. 2024 spring wheat planted acreage is at the lowest level since the early 70s, 1972 to be specific. Area harvested for grain at 10.3 million acres is unchanged from last month, but down 5.4% compared to last year. Yield is estimated at a record high 52.5 bushels per acre, down 0.2% from August, but up 14.1% or 6.5 bushels from 2023. Total production comes in at 542 million bushels, down slightly from last month, but up 8% compared to last year. This chart shows planted and harvested acres over the past 10 years. As you can see, we've experienced year-over-year declines in planted acreage in 5 out of the last 6 years. Next up, a chart showing how today's final yield number ranks historically. As I mentioned earlier, the 52.5 bushels per acre in 2024 is a record high. Here's a breakdown of the spring wheat yields by state. Again, the top number is the average yield measured in bushels per acre, and the bottom number is the percent change from August. Note the contrast between some of the larger spring wheat producing states. North Dakota and Minnesota tallied record high yields as they had adequate moisture during key parts of the growing season. Montana, on the other hand, had remained quite dry and they didn't fare nearly as well. Once again, here's a similar map, except this time with a comparison to the previous year. You can see everyone but Montana are showing year-over-year increases in spring wheat yields. Next, a quick look at the total production and how it compares to recent years. 2024 production is up 8% from last year and the highest level since 2020. Finally, our last spring wheat slide, how NASA's monthly forecasts and today's final estimate compare to the pre-report industry expectations. Again, the blue dots are the industry expectations, while the red squares are NASA's monthly forecasts and today's final production number. You can see no real surprises here, as today's spring wheat number aligned pretty closely with the industry expectations. Now for durum wheat, planted area at 2,064,000 acres is down 1% from last month, but up 23.2% from last year. Area harvested for grain is estimated at 2,036,000 acres, up 0.9% from August and 26.9% from 2023. The yield of 39.3 bushels per acre is up 3.1% or 1.2 bushels from last month and up 6.2% or 2.3 bushels compared to last year. Total production comes in at just over 80 million bushels, up 4.1% from August and 34.9% from last season. Again, like we had for winter wheat and other spring wheat, this chart shows planted and harvested acreage over the past 10 years. You can see the significant acreage increases compared to last year that I mentioned on the last slide. 2024 marks the highest planted acreage level since 2018 and the highest harvested acreage since 2017. Now onto our yield chart for durum wheat. At 39.3 bushels per acre, this year's yield is up from last year, but it still fell short of the historical trend line. Here's a breakdown of durum wheat yields by state. Like we saw on the spring wheat maps, the interesting story here again is Montana versus North Dakota. North Dakota's record yield was aided by catching timely rains during the growing season. Again, very quickly, here's how today's durum wheat yields compared to last year, 2023. Here's a chart for total production and how it compares to recent years. With the increased acreage across the board and record yields in North Dakota, 2024 durum wheat production is at its highest level since 2016. And now our last durum wheat slide, how today's estimate compared to industry expectations. We did come in just slightly higher than trade estimates, but only slightly. Next, a quick look at a few other small grain crops that were included in today's report. Barley acreage at 2.4 million acres is down from both last month and last year. Yield at 76.7 bushels per acre is down 3% from last month, but up 6.1% compared to 2023. Overall, barley production is down 23% from last year. Oats planted acres are down from last year, but harvested acreage is up. The national average yield of 76.5 bushels per acre is a record high. This results in total production of 67.8 million bushels. We have a really similar story with rye. Planted acres are down from 2023, while harvested area is up year over year. The average yield of 36.6 bushels per acre is a record high. Production is up 42% from 2023. Now, before we transition over to stocks, one more note on small grain acreage. I mentioned this at the beginning of the presentation. In some instances, harvest wasn't complete when we went out to do the survey. To ensure we had a good handle on how many acres were still in the field and what their expectations were for those crops, we asked a few follow-up questions and captured their intentions for those acres. As you can see, really nothing too noteworthy here. In most cases, harvest was moving along at or ahead of the average pace. Now on to some highlights from today's grain stocks report. September marks the beginning of the marketing year for the 2024 wheat crop. Total wheat stocks at just under 2 billion bushels are up 12.4% or 219 million bushels compared to 2023. On-farm stocks are up 11% and off-farm stocks are up 13.1% from last September. The way this slide is laid out, the blue vertical bars represent the beginning supply for each season. The horizontal lines represent the 4 quarterly stocks estimates that we make throughout the year. As I mentioned on the last slide, September marks the start of the marketing year for the 2024 wheat crop. You can see the green line indicating 1.99 total stocks of 1.99 billion bushels. June to August disappearance was 682 million bushels, and that's up 12.5% from that same timeline last year. Again, the industry expectations, no real surprises here for wheat stocks. As you can see, that red square is right in the middle of the industry expectations. Now on to corn stocks. For both corn and soybeans, September is the end of the marketing year. Corn stocks are up across the board when compared to last year. Total stocks at 1.76 billion bushels are up 29.4%. Or 400 million bushels from 2023. On-farm stocks are up 29.1% and off-farm are up 29.7%. Now this chart is very similar to the one we just saw for wheat. However, this time you'll see the green line is at the bottom of the stack. This again is because September is the final quarter of the marketing year for 2023. June to August disappearance was 3.24 billion bushels, and that's up 18% compared to the same period in 2023. Not a real big surprise here either. We are in the range of expectations, although it may be on the lower side for what some were thinking. Now, a quick look at the balance sheet for corn and just a little background on this table. Looking at the previous estimates column, those numbers with an asterisk by them are taken directly from the September WASDE report. The other numbers in that column are the previously published NASS estimates. Now, for the second column over, the current estimates, it's the same story with the WASDE numbers, and we know that most likely some of those estimates will change in the next report. But for now, they are the most current publicly available numbers that we have to work with. Over in the change column on the far right, you'll see a couple of small changes. Production was adjusted down 1 million bushels and ending stocks are down 52 million bushels from what was previously published. Now, in the unlikely event that none of the WASDE numbers change next month, the overall feed and residual number would be up 50 million bushels from what was published earlier this month. But we'll all have to stay tuned and see what happens on the 11th. That 1 million bushel adjustment to production up at the top was the result of some very small changes to harvested acreage in a couple of states. And those changes were driven by final administrative data. Moving on to soybean stocks, total stocks at 342 million bushels are up 29.5% or 77.8 million bushels compared to last year. On-farm stocks are up 54.4%, while off-farm stocks up 20.1%. On this chart showing the numbers from the past 10 seasons, again, September is the green horizontal line at the bottom. And although it's not by a lot, today's estimate is the highest ending stocks since the 2019-2020 marketing year. June to August disappearance is 628 million bushels, up 18% compared to the same time last year. And here's a comparison to the industry expectations. Again, it appears there shouldn't be any really big surprises with today's soybean stocks either, well, except for maybe one person. Next up, the balance sheet for soybeans, and this table is laid out the same way corn was. Looking at the right side, you'll notice the small adjustments to production. Again, that is driven by some final administrative harvested acreage data. Ending stocks are up 2 million bushels from earlier this month, and for the moment, resulting in a small decrease to the residual. Now, before we start to wrap up, a few more stocks numbers for you. For barley, total stocks are down 14.3% year over year. On-farm stocks are down 27.3%, but off-farm are up 14.7%. Durum wheat total stocks are up 17.5% from 2023, while oats stocks are down 13.4%. Safflower stocks are up 82.5% year over year and are at the highest levels since 2017. Sorghum stocks are up 26% and are at the second highest level since 2019. Finally, sunflower stocks are up 57.2% and the fourth highest level on record for September. That wraps up the highlights from today's report, but before we let you go, here's a look at a few of our upcoming reports in the month of October. These include the CARE reports tomorrow. We have cotton ginnings and the monthly crop production report on Friday the 11th. And later in October, cattle on feed and a couple of special publications from our Census of Agriculture program. Also, we'd like to put a plug in for our fall data users meeting. This is an all virtual event and it will take place on the afternoons of October 15th and 16th. This meeting is free and open to the public, however, registration is required. You can find out more about this event and register on our website. Registration is now open. Finally, at 1 o'clock Eastern today, as Lance mentioned earlier, we'll be hosting a Stat Chat social media event on X, taking questions and sharing additional information about today's reports. As always, the full reports are available on our website. That concludes today's briefing. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today in person